It has been said that average people want you to stay average. Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now, for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustafson and Mike Harbour.
Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast. My name is Paul Gustafson, and you are part of episode number 25 of the Breaking Average podcast. And joining me is my co-host, Mike Harbour. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Paul. I am fantastic. It's hard to believe that we're at episode 25 of season 2, man, but it's been a blast.
It has been a blast, and we're just scratching the surface. We got so much great stuff to share, and we're excited to be able to do this. And today we're going to be diving into a new factor in the book, Breaking Average. These are 7 factors to team strong leadership, Mike, and this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're kind of at the halfway point, Paul. Number 4, right? The 4th critical factor for team strong leadership from your book, Breaking Average. I'm excited to continue in this conversation and dive in. We're going to, bring a couple of other guests in to help us really collaborate around this factor later.
Yeah, it's fun. And one of the things that you challenged me with when we started this whole series is, hey, Paul, bring to light a story. And there's so many great stories, and we would love to hear from our listeners on stories that they have. I want to share one, Mike, that I think is pretty impactful. It's based on a movie that I think you've seen a few times. In fact, I think you told me about this movie way back when. Yeah. So last week we shared this little story of Chick-fil-A, and just briefly, but then we also really talked about Pixar. And I think we, in the book, we use a Catmull quote, to start off this chapter on trust. But I want to pull from a different movie, and we do highlight it in the book, but maybe share some revelations of that movie on this podcast that you won't see in the book. And I went and did some research on this. This just captivates me. 12 Strong is the name of the movie. It was came out in 2018. Fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, you ought to go see it. And one of our movies that we picked, Remember the Titans. Somebody had said this is like the Remember the Titans of movies of this year. And it's not a sports movie at all, but it's got that kind of feel to it. It's really good. So there's a young leader. His name is Captain Mitch Nelson. It's based on a true story. The actor who plays it is Chris Hemsworth. You guys know him as Thor, right? In all the Avenger movies. And he takes a special forces team into Afghanistan right after 9/11. I mean, he pretty much says, guys, I can't sit behind a desk. I got to go in there. We need to do something. So he goes on a combat mission. He brings the Operational Detachment Alpha 595, ODA 595. That's how they identify themselves, as an Operational Detachment Alpha. And he brings that group into Afghanistan. Now, there's not high chances of success on this, little chance of success. All right. And he wanted to be part of, and all the guys wanted to be part of this Operation Enduring Freedom, as they called it back then. But he had never led a group of soldiers into combat before. Now, he led people, he was a leader, but not into a battle before. So he's kind of green. Despite the inexperience, he knows he can count on 3 things. 3 things that I think are so important: trust, training, and tenacity. Trust is what gives him and his teammates confidence in themselves and the relationships that they have in one another. Training is what gives them competence. So it reminds them, like, hey guys, we've done this before. We've trained through this. And that reminded them of the competence that they have. So you have confidence and competence. And that third piece, tenacity, that's what gives them commitment, right? The fortitude to never give up, because they're going to need that, right? When you go to war, you just can't say, I'm tired today. That's it. I'm done. No, you got to keep going on. You got to keep having that. What's interesting, guys, is that you can't get to training and tenacity without trust. You just can't get to it without trust. And so that's so key. I love this story. Let me just unpack it just a little bit more, and then we'll dive in. I know we've got Rick and Diane already in studio with us, so I can't wait to hear their thoughts on this too. But so they go into Operation Enduring Freedom, and they develop a partnership with the Northern Alliance. All right, some Afghans who are trying to fight the Taliban and the Al Qaeda allies, which is cool. So you got to partner up with them, and so he meets this leader, this North Alliance leader named Abdul Rashid Dostum. All right. Now, that name is actually kind of significant here, and I'll share more why in a minute. All right. So he meets with Dostum, who's a Northern Alliance leader, and doesn't go initially very well, but they find a way to interact. That was our podcast last week. To find a way to interact and build some trust, and so that's key. Now, they're moving along, but all of a sudden, there's a little struggle, a little strife, a little conflict, if you will, a crucial conversation. And Dostum learns from Nelson that another battalion, ODA 555, is partnering up with Dostum's political rival, all right, in Afghanistan. So there's some infighting going on. I mean, even though they're against the Taliban and everything else, there's a political rival, and Dostum doesn't like that at all. He's furious. And so he feels like the trust has been broken with the U.S. Army, and he just says, "Hey, that's it. We're gone." So he takes his guys out of there. So Nelson's devastated. He's not all alone. He's got his 11 other guys, so there's 12 of them there. Still got a job to do, and he's going to go do it. But he's more vulnerable at that point. So at one point they're outgunned and they're outnumbered. They're in a battle that there's probably no chance that they're going to win. It looks lost. But just at that moment, Dostum comes in with all his men on horses, essentially, and finds a way to really broker a peaceful deal with the differences of that other Afghan rival. So they come together and they join forces. And the reason why is they realize the sacrifice and commitment of the American warfighters, of the American efforts of what they're trying to do for their country. And knowing that they have to continue on their journey, Dostum offers him his 12 best horses, right? And it's kind of a weird moment, right? 21st century warfighters given horses, and they need them. They need him to travel. So he tells Nelson, right? Dostum, this is really powerful. He tells Nelson, he says that he'll always consider him his brother, which is really powerful. That is a moment of trust right there. So all 12 soldiers of the ODA 595 survived that whole ordeal after 23 days of just continuous warfare. I mean, it was just tough. And Dostum himself would become the vice president of Afghanistan, which is pretty amazing. I didn't know that until I did some research on that. So here's the reality. It's such a powerful story. When a team has trust, there's a belief that each team member can be relied upon. There's a faith that the team will prevail in the end. And you see that in this great story. And it's, again, a real life based on a true story. And I love this. If you go to Liberty Park, have you guys ever been to the World Trade Center, Liberty Park up there? Mm. There's a statue, and I can't wait to go see it. I saw a picture of it, and I was like, there's a 5,000-pound bronze statue of a U.S. Green Beret mounted on a horse. And it's depicted from an image that was taken at that battle during that campaign. And it's called the American Response Monument. And it's a monument that symbolizes the power of trust. And I love that story. Maybe I spent a little bit of time unpacking it, but it's so powerful, and I wanted to be sure that I got some of those key details in there. So, Mike, I know you've seen that movie. Pretty powerful, isn't it?
I've seen it multiple times, Paul. As a matter of fact, I just recently rewatched it because it's a powerful movie. Well, number one, I'm a military junkie, former military, so I love any movie, especially movies that are portrayals of like real stories, right? I mean, this is a real story. This is a true story. And there's lots of elements of this factor of trust in this movie, not just between Nelson and Dostum, but also Nelson and his team, right? He was a greenhorn, a Green Beret. I mean, he'd never been to combat, but most of the people on his team that he led had been to combat. They were older soldiers, older troops, and they had kind of been to combat before. And but they trusted him. because of his leadership and those kind of things. And I love the scene, Paul, when they first met Dostum. I don't know if you remember, but they bring him these gifts, right? They bring him vodka, they bring him all kinds of different gifts. And Dostum kind of looks around the room and he starts looking at their eyes and he says, "That guy has killer eyes. That guy has killer eyes. That guy, you don't have killer eyes." I don't know if you remember that scene, Paul, but it was a symbol of trust, right? He didn't trust Nelson yet because he knew Nelson hadn't been to combat. And this is a guy Dostum had lost his entire family to the Taliban, right? And so he was fighting for the honor of his family and his country. And then there's a scene later where they fight together and Dostum says, "Now you have killer eyes." That's when trust occurred, right? Because he had fought alongside him. Trust was built in that moment. And for us as leaders, for us as team builders, sometimes building trust requires us to get in the foxhole with people and fight along with them, right? You can as leaders step back into the background and watch. I think of one of the movies we've talked about, like with Gladiator, if you remember the Gladiator, where kind of the leaders kind of set back on their horses, right? Or like even one of my favorite movies, Braveheart, where, Mel Gibson he's out fighting with his people. That's where real trust is built. You're getting me fired up talking about these military movies, right? But
I know.
Breaking average and this idea of trust as leaders, you got to get in the fight with people to really build that trust. And as John Maxwell says, trust is the foundation of leadership. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this element of trust and these critical factors that are important. Let's bring Diane and Rick. I'm ready now to bring Diane and Rick into the conversation. Hey, Diane and Rick, how are you guys today?
Good.
Doing good.
I have watched the movie, Mike. It took me a few minutes. I'm like, have I watched this movie? And I have. It was the moment when you were talking around the table. You have killer eyes, and you have killer eyes, and you not so much. And how does that? Let's bring those back to those three critical factors of trust, right? And credibility. If I'm looking at you and I'm looking in your eyes, you're not there yet. But credibility is that realness, that transparency, that authenticity, that willingness, right? The second factor in our building of trust is dependability. It's walking the talk, getting dirty, like getting in the foxhole. It's so true. If we're not demonstrating it, then how can we ever be trusted? And the third one is serving. And it's how can we help as a servant leader? It's making sure that, we're there to support as well. And so let's continue this conversation on how we build credibility and trust. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Gladiator as well, as Gladiator was the movie that knocked out 12 Strong in our wonderful brackets. That was the one that it's the first time I've ever really seen Mike pout really, really hard. And but no, 12 Strong, phenomenal movie. And again, the bravery it takes to be first, right?
Yes.
We start talking about the leadership and those who go first. But when we start talking about being dependable, right, in that area of trust, being dependable means consistency as well. And Roy Bennett said, consistency is the true foundation of trust. Either keep your promises or don't make them. And wow. Mic drop. Nothing else needs to be said after that. Either keep your promises or don't make them.
Right.
Yeah. I think we're done with our podcast.
Yeah,
we can end
that's
right
pretty
now.
Much it. Yeah,
yeah, that's really good. And Paul, you started this chapter out with a quote from Catmull about trust doesn't mean that someone won't screw something up, that they won't make a mistake. It just means that you trust them enough to make mistakes, right? And that's not the exact quote, but it's trust is about handing the reins over to someone and trust them enough to make mistakes. You have their back, you pick them up. And we're going to dive deeper into this whole idea of credibility in this chapter as well. But hey, we want to ask our listeners, if you're listening to the Breaking Average podcast, or if you're watching on our Empowered Living show, make sure you visit our website, breakingaveragepodcast.com. And then also, we're always looking for leaders that we can interview and highlight on the show as well. We'd love for you to go to breakingaveragepodcast.com/leader. There's a form there that you can share the name and contact information. We'll do the rest from there. And, we know that there are leaders that remind you of this great trust, this great credibility. And so we'd love to have them as a potential guest on the show as well. Dan, we also have a great sponsor today. Can you share that with us?
We do have a really great sponsor today, and also a military veteran. So Jay Johnson is one of our contributing authors, and right into this chapter within Breaking Average. Jay's a retired Air Force veteran, and Jay likes to talk about and brings in the culture aspects of it and bringing in the servant leadership pieces. So when he's working with individuals and corporations, those are the pieces that he's looking at. He's of course a fellow John Maxwell team member. If you need a speaker, if you need someone who's going to help build the credibility within your team, then Jay is a great resource for you. And you can look him up right at his website. It is www.j2servantleadership.com. And you can also follow him on his profile on LinkedIn, and that's Jay Johnson J2. For his profile there as well. So if you need that support and you really want to build some credibility, Jay is a great resource on building trust as well.
Yeah, Jay's great. And so thankful for him being a contributing author on the book. He really does help businesses and individuals achieve extraordinary success. I love his tagline. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Jay, for being a sponsor on this and being a contributing author. Guys, this is, I've been pumped about this podcast for a while because credibility, I think, is so key and so important. Let's talk about that, right? What does credibility mean? Why does it matter? Rick, I'd love to get your take on this. Why is it so critical?
It's the foundation, right? I mean, if you're not a credible source, we all have those people that we know in our lives that are the embellishers or the one-uppers or, those kinds of things. And, it starts to become frustrating. Sophocles, who I read daily, and that's not a credible statement. Sophocles said that trust dies and mistrust blossoms. And it's a really, really interesting quote because trust can only really, you can build trust, but it really just erodes at that point. Whereas and the reason why it's eroding is because mistrust then begins to blossom or pick up, right? As I was doing the prep for this show, just so many stories came flooding back because I've been shattered many times in my life because I trust very easily. I give people inherent trust right out of the gate. And I love that I do that, and I don't want to change that. But it has set up some really spectacular, flame outs for me at the same time. But I trusted that they live the lives that they state they do, and I give almost everybody I meet that inherent trust right out of the gate. That when you're telling me a story or you're sharing an experience, that's something that really happened to you. But what's amazing to me is when that trust starts to erode to that birth of mistrust, everything becomes questioned at that point, and every intention becomes questioned at that point. And so really interestingly, and it's not something personal, but just a story that came to mind would be like Bernie Madoff, right? In the beginning, right? He was just incredible returns, and what he had to say everybody was listening to, and all this other stuff, and then it turned out to be all built on a house of cards, right? None of it was true. None of the returns were true. And then all of a sudden, everything he said, people just scoffed at, and it's amazing to watch how fast people will begin to pile on to the mistrust side. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like the moment something breaks, the moment a story changes, the moment somebody is proven to not have done what they said they were going to do, people pile on to that faster than they do to, oh no, they're upstate. Like it's this natural reaction. And I think part of that is because a lot of us become jealous or feeling not worthy that they can achieve what a lot of these people do. And I see that a lot when I'm counseling speakers. A lot of people that I coach want to be professional speakers. And in fact, I was just talking to a good friend of mine because he's got a speech coming up in 3 days. but he was like, Rick, everything I'm saying has been said before. And I said, I think almost everything anybody's saying has been said before. What they haven't heard is your authentic voice, your ability to create trust with the audience through your personal experiences that then relate a lesson that maybe we've heard before, but we haven't heard it from you that way. But then I've watched a lot of speakers get up there and tell somebody else's story, and it's not authentic, and that the trust of everything that they had said just erodes away. So I think credibility is important, coming back to the quote too of don't make promises if you're not going to keep them. I think it's don't make statements if they're not true to you as well, because it just takes the one lie or the one story to unravel for you then to have that mistrust blossom.
Yeah. That's good, man. I'm writing notes here.
Right.
It's true. I mean, I was thinking about, how Maxwell talks about just that credibility, the change in your pocket kind of thing. And, we build credibility, and if we're not careful, we empty our pockets. We might empty our pockets too fast, and we can't build that trust again.
It's those withdrawals that you were talking about in the last podcast too, Rick, when we were talking about that in the interactions, right? You've quickly made a withdrawal and you've lost all your credibility. And as you were sitting there, we were talking about it. And Mike, you talked about trusting somebody with the information and know that you're going to give them the reins and that that those mistakes are going to happen. And owning the mistake. And when we were talking about, and that's how we build that credibility, is owning that. And we were talking about Live to Lead in one of the other podcasts, and Kat Cole was one of the speakers recently. And when she was taking the reins of Cinnabon and they were doing a major change under the recession. So, you've got Cinnabon that's, this thing that's as big as your face and full of sugar. They were making some significant shifts, and she was talking about where she had made this vital mistake, and it could have killed her credibility, because as the new president and the new leader, and we're making the significant change in it, when the change left the gate, it looked like one thing, but when it got down to the franchise owners, it was looking very completely different. And she, to keep her credibility, had to stop the train on the tracks and really pull everything back and say, I screwed that up. There was something that was wrong. We didn't have the structure in place. We didn't have the meetings that were in place. And I take full ownership of that. I take full ownership of what happened here. We're going to pull it back. And now we're going to put that structure in place. And we're going to put these conversations in place. And we really needed to rebuild that. So it gained her credibility back, because if she had not taken that ownership, then she would never have rebuilt her credibility going forward. And so that authenticity to say, I've screwed it up and I'm going to own it, helps build the credibility in our conversations, especially when we're leading and moving forward.
Yeah. Honesty goes a long way, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can no longer trust Diane to keep my diet in mind. She's talked about Cinnabon, and I haven't eaten breakfast yet. And I love Cinnabon. We're talking about this critical factor, and one of the elements, credibility. And there is so many stories right now. And I don't want to talk politics or anything like that, but you think about what's going on in New York right now with the governor of New York, and how, just a year ago, he was trusted by everybody, right? Maybe, or trusted by, certain people that were putting stories out. And now, just in a year's time, his all credibility is completely gone, just because, as Rick said, a story comes out. It's credibility has a razor thin edge, right? It has a razor thin edge. Mm-hmm. And I love that quote, Rick, that you shared earlier about how trust begins to die. As soon as it's built, it begins to die, right? And that mistrust can blossom in a hurry as well when stories are out there. And so we have to be careful as a leader, as a communicator, as someone who's building trust with others. Make sure every day trust is something that you have to build, right? It's not a one-time thing. I think when we talk about credibility, we go back to the story that Paul shared with us from the beginning of the book. trust is some people. Rick, there are two types of people, right? Rick is one who trusts quickly and immediately, but we go back to Dostum, who didn't trust at all until you have killer eyes now, right? Until somebody had actually got in the battle with him. But that's how he expected people to build credibility with him. And as leaders and communicators and team players, we have to understand that there are two types of people. And credibility, some people, our credibility comes just by our experience, and people are going to buy into that. But some people need to see us. They need to see us in the battle. They need to see us walk that journey alongside of them. And then once you've built that credibility, it's razor thin. Just because you have a life of credibility doesn't mean it can't be destroyed in one failure, especially with some people. And it's much harder to rebuild as well. Paul?
Yeah, this is so good. Again, I've been writing notes. You guys are hitting all the key elements here that I think are really important. And I just want to invite our listeners, our viewers, really kind of lean in on this. This area of credibility is something that you and I have control over. Okay? There may be some disparaging remarks made of us at any time, critical remarks. It can happen. You guys have heard of the telephone game, right? Or the Chinese whisper. Right, where a comment, the telephone game is where you enter in the room and someone starts a little chain of, hey, they whisper something to one person, they keep passing it along. And I started thinking about the effect that has, where the story changes over time. And so the message that finally gets at the end of the train isn't the same message that was delivered at the beginning. But we have control over that. We have control over the narrative that's shared and the ability to effectively tell the truth and be the truth for somebody else. And we can bolster other people up. If they deserve credibility for something that they've done, then maybe it's on me. Maybe the onus is on me to make sure as a leader, no matter what position I'm in, to identify that, to acknowledge that, to affirm that person and what they've done, because that builds credibility. When you go to Amazon.com or Best Buy or wherever you go, the first thing that you do is you review whatever product that you want to buy. Is you look at the reviews, because you're looking at the credibility of the product. But you're not just looking at the credibility of the product. You're looking at the credibility of the person who created that product. You want to know, is that a reliable, reputable business? So this is really important. Credibility comes from competence and commitment. And what I've learned, guys, and you've heard this before, it's not always about the big things. It's about the little things. And we can do little things really, really well, right? And if we just do that over time, that builds more credibility. I forget where it's said. You've heard it many times. Whoever can be trusted with small things can be trusted with big things. So I would say it starts with that credibility. It's just being focused on those little things. And over time, you're going to build trust. I think that's so important. Credibility means you're authentic. And those are just a few thoughts. There's so much more. We could spend a lot of time, but I want to dive into how do we cultivate credibility in others, by others, with our team, right? Because we want credibility for ourselves. We want to be seen as credible, but we need to help others be credible. And I just gave one little thought in terms of affirming them, but I want to hear what you guys think. How do we cultivate a spirit of credibility? Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Mike said it so perfect, giving over the reins. So as a leader, when we are developing another leader with us, we're actually loaning our credibility to the leader that we're developing and walking alongside of them and starting with those smaller bits. So it's slowly handing over the reins, knowing that you're the person whose credibility is being borrowed as you're developing the other leader, and giving them the power and the authority to screw things up. When I was working with one of the leaders within one of my teams, it was I'm not ready, right? I'm not ready. Well, you're never going to be ready, but I'm going to walk with you. And so here's how we're going to do it. And sitting alongside and waiting very patiently and giving the voice to that other individual and just giving them a small chunk so that they can build their own credibility on their own. I think that that's part of the process in doing that. And one of the other parts of credibility, and this was, Mike, you had mentioned, everybody communicates, few connect. And what I have it sitting here is part of my focus, you know, and Rick, you said it earlier, either you make the promise or you don't. And part of the credibility is when you make a commitment, you're creating hope. When you keep the commitment, you're creating the trust.
That's good. That's good. I like that.
And I think that that's
Can
part
you say
of
that one more time? When you make a commitment, you're creating hope.
You're creating hope. And when you keep that commitment, whether it's a small one or a big one, you create the trust.
Yeah, that's good. Love that. Rick, what are your thoughts on this, man?
Yeah, I think I love that quote as well, Diane. I think it's leading by example is the way to do it, is to instill credibility into others. And it's even, you know, small things. I work in an industry that works in uncertainty all the time. You know, when I'm handed a project, the first thing they want me to answer is how much is it going to cost and how long does it take? And we don't know anything about it yet. And I watch a lot of people fail in credibility right out of the gate by guessing something that is that absurd. And so I've developed some tips and tricks. I'll give one of my favorite ones now, especially in pricing. I think a lot of us deal with sales and pricing, but I'll be 15 minutes into a conversation with a brand new client and they'll be like, you know, just a ballpark figure, right? And people freeze at that moment, because if you go too low, then, you know, you're hurting your credibility. And if you go too high, but I make a joke out of it right out of the gate, but it also shows that I'm going to answer questions as honestly as possible. And so they'll go, what do you think, ballpark? And maybe it's like a $300,000 project. And I'll go, I can guarantee it's going to be less than 5 million. But you know what? I like you so far. So 2.5 million for sure. Less than $1 million, right? And then I just gloss right on by that. Now I've answered the question, and it's credible. It's my price is going to come in less than $1 million. I know it, right? But it's about establishing some credibility that I'm going to answer the questions that you give me, but you may not like the answers are going to be as vague as the question itself. And one of the other things I teach from stage, people always ask, how long is it going to take? And for some reason, project managers have to speak in absolutes. Like we have to, March 31st, we're going live. And I've never understood that. So I always give a range. I say between, March 1st to probably August. I don't know. And they go, well, why can't you tell me? And I always like to come back with, well, how long does it take you to get to work? They go, what do you mean? I go, well, how long does it take you to get to work? I mean, you've been here 10 years. How long does it take? They go, 20 minutes. I said, really? Every day, 20 minutes? Yep. And I go, what's the fastest you've ever made it? They'll go, 17, right? And I go, okay. What's the longest it's taken you to get to work in 10 years? And then you'll hear 2 hours, hour and a half. And you go, why? Well, there was an ice storm or an accident, things outside of their control. And I said, okay, so you've been here 10 years. There's 220 work days in a year. So you've done this 2,000 times. And you just gave me about a 700% variance. But you want me to put 20 people in a room that's never done this before. And I got to tell you the exact day we're going to be finished or we're all in trouble, right? And so I like to follow up with one more question and go, when could you tell me how long it would take you to get to work October 17th next year? And they'll go, what? And I go, October 17th next year, how long is it going to take you to get to work? And I said, when would you be willing to commit? Right? Maybe 10 minutes into the drive, once you're past all the different choke points, your car started, there's no ice on the road. I said, so that's what I'm asking for you to do with my team, is to let us get down the road a little bit, and then we can commit. So I'll give you a range now, but as we get down the road, we'll commit. All of that is building credibility. I'm answering the questions, but I'm also showing why. So instead of going, I don't know, or that's a dumb question, or committing to myself to something we know we can't hit, it's building credibility by answering questions with knowledge and examples to show them why. The most interesting thing about that, and why I even bring that story up, is I do that from stage. And I think speakers and people who teach and people who coach need to be authentic. And so I got hired by somebody who saw me on stage and said, I want to bring you into the organization. And when I did the exact same things I just said, they were like, well, we didn't think you were actually going to do that. And I was like, why wouldn't I? So there was this instant thought pattern that I wouldn't actually follow through on a lot of the things that I say that I do from stage, because when we're on stage, people think we're embellishing. And at the end of the day, which means I got instant credibility from that firm because I did what I said I was going to do. So I think you lead by example. I think you answer as honestly as possible, but you give an answer regardless of how absurd the question is, right? You may have to answer it with absurdity, but you give an answer and you show people how to communicate through analogy.
Wow. Rick, so much to unpack on that. That was really, really good. I want to pull on that in a little bit, but Mike, I know you got some additional thoughts. Can you lean in on that? Share some of your tactics and strategies.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's similar to what Rick and Diane have shared. I really think of four things when it comes to building credibility, right? Law of connection that we're all familiar with, really connecting with the person and who they are versus who I am. I think that's, important, connecting with to a person's heart, really kind of getting to understand them, know who they are as an individual, how they trust. Do they trust quickly, or do I need to spend a little more time with them to build trust? I mean, that's really what connection is. What do they value? What's important to them, in the project. I mean, this is really about the law of connection. And as a communicator, as a leader, you've got to, that takes a little bit of time. You can't just walk in the room and expect everybody to trust you because you have a title, right? I mean, some people don't trust you because you have a title, and some people will trust you because you have a title. And so I think it's very important from a law of connection standpoint that you understand that and make sure you do the things that you need to do to build credibility with different people in the room. The law of the mirror, Rick calls it lead by example or example. Law of the mirror is people do what people see. If I trust you, you're more likely to trust me. But if I don't trust you, guess what? You're not going to trust me. I mean, it's kind of a give and take, right? We get what we give, which is the cause and effect, right? If I give trust, I'm potentially going to get trust and credibility from others. If I withhold trust, like if I give you a project but I don't trust you, I question everything, I try to micromanage, you're not going to trust me as well. So that's that cause and effect. And then there's the law of what I've called the law of time. It takes time. Sometimes it takes time to build trust and credibility with others. And that sometimes has to do with who you are, but many times it has to do with who the other person is. So as a leader, whatever it takes, whatever time it takes, you've got to be willing to give it the time that's necessary to build trust with others as well. And those are kind of four things, Paul, I think, when I think about cultivating this credibility that every leader should understand and be aware of. Yeah.
Guys, I am literally capturing so many great notes here. I feel like, wow, there's a whole new book to spin out of here about talking. Think about this, right? We all want to be incredible. We want to be incredible in our business. You can't be incredible unless you're credible first. That's where it starts. And we have that opportunity. We all have that choice to be credible. Rick made a comment, and I wrote this down. Be who you say you are. Be authentic. Be who you say you are. That was a great story, Rick. And I'm glad you gave us the whole story, because you gave us context to understanding how important it is. If what you say, your actions don't match your words, then you're not being credible. You're not being credible. And I love Lencioni's comment about, this whole idea of trust being something that's really important from building our credibility. And we have to overcome our need for invulnerability. And invulnerability is a desire to be sheltered from harm or damage. We got to shed that. And so it's this desire for invulnerability that can keep us from pursuing those dreams, those aspirations, and that engagement with others. We talked about interaction last time. We've got to be vulnerable to be able to have interaction. And so key. There's so much that we could unpack more on that. But I love these 4 laws that you mentioned, Mike. Those are so good. And I would just share everybody, hey, let's try to overcome the need for invulnerability. Let's be credible. Let's lead by example. Let's be trusted and believed in, because if we can do those things, we can go from credible to incredible. So, this is great. Well,
I've not heard that before, Paul, and I don't know if but that's definitely a quote card for you. Then you can't be incredible until you're credible. That's amazing.
Well, you guys inspired it. I wrote it down. I've never heard it either, but I just like, whoa, okay. You inspired it. So
that's one of those 100 years from now. It's going to go, Paul Gustafson is going to be tweeted out on Facebook. I love that. This is one of my favorite things that this podcast.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens. This is why we wanted to get all of us in the same room, because if it's just one of us doing a podcast, then we don't have that interaction. I wanted to make sure we had a podcast where we were pulling off thoughts from each other, and there's a lot of experience in the room right now. And all that experience means something. How can we pull from that experience? Part of our credibility is being able to share and share that information and allow others to experience things too. So powerful. We've got a great sponsor today that we've already highlighted. I want to just mention Jay Johnson is our sponsor, and he, he's about this. This is what trust is. He was a collaborating, contributing author on this bit on trust. And he is passionate about trust and helping you build that credibility. And just reach out to him at his website. I'm trying to remember his website.
J2servantleadership.com.
J2servantleadership.com. Go check that out. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Well, we're ready to dive into tips and challenge. This is so good. I want to thank our sponsors we just mentioned, and invite all our listeners to visit our website, breakingaverage.com. Diane, any closing thoughts or ideas you want to share with us?
I'm just gonna get you an incredible shirt to go along with your quote. So there's nothing else to top that right now.
I like that. Cool.
And my closing idea then is, if she does that, then you and Mike both have to wear them at the same time. So
that's good. We'll do it. We should all have those shirts.
No, just the two of you.
Only I'm probably the only
after
one
all.
that can wear the Mr. Incredible shirt on the show. So I agree with Rick. No, not everybody.
I can get some built-in muscle t-shirts. All right. Well, guys, it's been great. I just a joy to have you on, and you guys gave some really great thoughts today. And we invite our listeners just to fire back some of the key takeaways that you've heard from Rick, Diane, Mike. This is so good. Mike, tip and challenge. What do you have to close us with?
Yeah, it's good. This is good. This was a good conversation. I had a tip and challenge in mind, but, Paul, you talked about vulnerability or invulnerability. I think it's key to build credibility with others to share some vulnerability, right? I'll just share something from personal. Just recently, I buried my sister. We had a funeral, and I shared, we have a men's group that meets on Wednesday night at church. And I shared a little bit from that. I did the eulogy, and I hadn't spoken to my mother in 15 years prior to that day. And I shared a little bit about that in this men's group that I'm a part of. And after that, because I was vulnerable, I shared some things about, from my personal life that, there's reasons why I haven't spoken to my mother in that long, but I shared some things in my personal life. But there were people in that room, men in that room, who I've never had a conversation with, who've never said a word to me before, who've never talked to me, that are now coming up to me or sending me text messages or Facebook messages. Or, I even saw a guy in the gym a couple of days later that I've seen in the gym 100 times before, and we've never said a word to each other because we're typically in there working out. He came up and wanted to talk because I shook something up in him, right? And it was because of that vulnerability that built a little credibility between he and I. This is a guy I didn't even know his name before. But the tip is learn to be vulnerable, right? Learn to be vulnerable. I think as a leader, that's where we begin to build credibility with others. And then the challenge is find an opportunity to do that. And you don't have to share all of your dark secrets and those kind of things. Just share enough to build that credibility with others and see where it goes. Follow that up with good, communication, connection to help others and serve others.
I love that. I love that story that you shared too, and sorry, condolences again to your family and the loss of your sister. I know that was tough, but good on you, Mike, to share, from the heart, in front of all those folks. And you just reminded me the importance of us being vulnerable And being vulnerable, like you just said, doesn't mean, sharing every dark secret in your world. No. Being vulnerable means just being there for somebody else, just being there and being open and honest with somebody else, candid or candor as Ed Catmull talks about. Because, we all have testimonies, and testimonies, we can't share a testimony unless we've gone through a test, and we've all gone through tests. And when we can share it with somebody else, say, hey, this is the challenge that I went through. This is what I've struggled with. This is what I've struggled with. Then that gives room for somebody else to reach out, like you have just received some emails, some text messages of people coming up to you at the gym and just reaching out to you because you've allowed yourself to be vulnerable. Now you have a connection. We talked about connections last time. And now you're building credibility, because hey, wow, that's somebody that knows what it's like to go through what he's gone through, because I've been through that kind of thing, right? So to be incredible, we have to be credible, as I mentioned earlier, and part of that has to be we have to be vulnerable. We have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is what leads us to credibility. And that's the tip and challenge. Trust creates confidence, guys. Just remember that. Trust creates confidence. Confidence in you, confidence in other people in you. And to get there, sometimes we have to be vulnerable. Start building credibility. And if you have to be vulnerable a little bit, do that. And we do that with you guys each week. We try to be a little bit vulnerable with you. It's not easy for us to dust off our clothes and jump on a podcast and be a part of this and realizing that we're being vulnerable a little bit. But we feel we have such a passion to encourage you and to challenge you to break average that we're willing to do that. And we hope that we do that. And so we're excited. So Mike, tell folks where they can go visit us and share some of their thoughts.
Yeah, well, Paul, I'm not sure where you're keeping your clothes that you have to dust them off, but
he does have his paint clothes on today.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love this idea. I mean, you never know. What's fun about these conversations that we have, we kind of start with the book Breaking Average, right? And so for our listeners, make sure you grab a copy of the Breaking Average book that Paul wrote. But sometimes we kind of have a direction we're going, but based on experience, based on conversation, they kind of take a different direction. And we talked about credibility today, but it really led us into this deeper discussion of vulnerability and how vulnerability helps us build credibility with others. And we've all been vulnerable in our own ways today. And Paul, I just want to thank you for leading today's conversation. And thank you, Diane and Rick, for joining and adding great value to our conversation today as well. And I want to continue to recognize Jay Johnson. Make sure you visit Jay's website, j2servantleadership.com. And then also our website, breakingaveragepodcast.com. Paul continues to add great value to you, great resources and tools to help you continue to break average in your own life and leadership.
Guys, this has been great conversation. I'm going to think about this all day long because I think there's some really good takeaways. I'm looking at my notes now and I'm just like, yes, I'm so glad we had this conversation. It was hard too, because just for everybody, all the listeners, this is the day that our clocks changed. So we got up an hour earlier to do this, and I'm so glad we did. Thank you guys for saying yes to this. Great conversation, guys, and great topic once again on breaking average. And I love this idea of credibility, and we all have that choice to be more credible. And once again, I'm inspired by our mission of leadership and breaking average. Join us next time.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. This show was produced by R Squared Multimedia. A special thank you to Milestone Melodies for our theme music. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.